Now Mephibosheth, Saul's grandson, came down from Jerusalem to meet the king. He had not cared for his feet, trimmed his beard, or washed his clothes since the day the king left Jerusalem. "Why didn't you come with me, Mephibosheth?" the king asked him. Mephibosheth replied, "My lord the king, my servant Ziba deceived me. I told him, 'Saddle my donkey so I can go with the king.' For as you know, I am crippled. Ziba has slandered me by saying that I refused to come. But I know that my lord the king is like an angel of God, so do what you think is best." Turns out maybe Ziba was lying to David before, but there's no real, proof, at least not yet, of who's really telling the truth here. So David, kind of wanting to believe them equally, it seems, is like, all right, well, you know what? I'll split the land between you two. What's up, cool people? My name's Matt. Welcome back to our Bible study. Alright, so we're looking at 2 Samuel chapter 19. Recent events, to give context. David's king, but he had some family troubles, especially some conflict between different sons of his. One of them killed the other, then fled, but of course, David, being a very kind man, including as a father, kinda still felt some sympathy toward his living son Absalom. So eventually Joab, his commander, brings Absalom back, but then Absalom just turns on his father David and tries to strip the throne away from him, whips up a rebellion. David flees to try to lessen the overall damage, especially to the capital, and they wind up fighting elsewhere. Absalom ends up dying, and of course, because that's David's son, he's kind of sad about all of it. And then we get to this chapter here. So here we go, 2 Samuel 19. Oh, right off the bat, what's shown as verse 1 here is actually verse 2 of the chapter in the original Hebrew text, or at least some of the Hebrew text that they pull the translations from. The first verse in those is actually the last verse here, where it mentions David being sad about Absalom's death. But as far as this chapter starts the way I think most modern Bibles would read, it goes a little bit like this. Word soon reached Joab that the king was weeping and mourning for Absalom. As all the people heard of the king's deep grief for his son, the joy of that day's victory was turned into deep sadness. They crept back into the town that day as though they were ashamed and had deserted in battle. The king covered his face with his hands and kept on crying, "Oh, my son Absalom! Oh, Absalom, my son! My son!" So, yeah. Clearly distraught over the loss of his son Absalom. Now, he had specifically told his troops, to be kind to Absalom, implying, hey, don't kill him, if at all possible. But Joab kinda had it in his mind that, especially because an easy opportunity to kill Absalom came about, he was dangling from a tree by his head in some way or another. Basically, Joab's like, okay, well, we can quell this rebellion right here, right now, if we just kill him. So, that's what happened. But David is sad over the loss of another son, essentially. And because of his attitude, his mood surrounding this whole situation, that winds up affecting all of his troops. if not more. This chapter is a little bit on the long side, so I'm going to keep rolling along. Try not to spend too long explaining my thoughts on a given section. Okay, verse 5. Then Joab went to the king's room and said to him, "We saved your life today, and the lives of your sons, your daughters, and your wives and concubines. Yet you act like this, making us feel ashamed of ourselves. You seem to love those who hate you and hate those who love you. You have made it clear today that your commanders and troops mean nothing to you. It seems that if Absalom had lived and all of us had died, you would be pleased. Now go out there and congratulate your troops, for I swear by the Lord that if you don't go out, not a single one of them will remain here tonight. Then you will be worse off than ever before." So Joab's basically correcting David, saying, all right, look, we just saved you and a bunch of people you care about a whole lot of trouble. Or at least you would think, people would think that you care about the other sons of yours, your wives, your daughters, the people of Israel in general. And yet, you're weeping over this. Makes it seem like you care more about your enemies than you do about the ones that you're kind of supposed to care for. So, like, buck up, go out there, and say something to the people, especially to your troops, so that they actually can feel positive about this. Like, we did a good thing, don't make them feel like it's bad. That's what Joab is saying to David, basically. Alright. On to verse 8. So the king went out and took his seat at the town gate. And as the news spread throughout the town that he was there, everyone went to him. Meanwhile, the Israelites who had supported Absalom fled to their homes. And throughout all the tribes of Israel, there was much discussion and argument going on. People were saying, "The king rescued us from our enemies and saved us from the Philistines, but Absalom chased him out of the country. Now Absalom, whom we anointed to rule over us, is dead. Why not ask David to come back and be our king again?" Okay, pausing there for a bit. It just says the king went out and took his seat and that the people gathered around, other than the one who had supported Absalom. But then those people kind of got together and were like, look, David's been good in general throughout this. He saved us from our enemies. Yeah, we liked Absalom, but David's not bad either. Maybe we should ask him to be king again. It still doesn't say that David actually fully said anything to the people broadly at this moment. But let's see what happens in verse 11. Then King David sent Zadok and Abiathar, the priests, to say to the elders of Judah, "Why are you the last ones to welcome back the king into his palace? For I have heard that all Israel is ready. You are my relatives, my own tribe, my own flesh and blood. So why are you the last ones to welcome the king?" And David told them to tell Amasa, "Since you are my own flesh and blood, like Joab, may God strike me and even kill me if I do not appoint you as commander of my army in his place." In Joab's place? I'm not sure. Because Joab's still alive and well. It seems like an odd choice, unless David's doing this because he's kind of tired of Joab going against what he has suggested before. But, so I guess it was, in part, people of Judah that had supported Absalom being king. I don't know. Whatever the circumstances were, Judah, where David had basically been, like, headquartered the entire time, where he was literally from, were delaying in accepting him back, it seemed. Oh, should have looked down a little further and just read this verse too. Verse 14 says, Then Amasa convinced all the men of Judah, and they responded unanimously. They sent word to the king, Return to us, and bring back all who are with you. Okay. So I guess because of David's communication to Amasa, Amasa comes back and is like, alright guys, we really don't have any reason to reject David as king at this point. Let's just get it over with. Now the note there, or David, Hebrew reads he, so it could have been Amasa doing the convincing, or it could have been David. Apparently the Hebrew reads as he, which, given the previous sentence, it could be referring to Amasa, or it could be referring to David. David was the one telling his officials or the priests to tell Amasa. It's one of the two. Either way, at this point, the men of Judah are all convinced to welcome David back as king. And to bring all of his men with him. Alright. Got a lot of the chapter to go. Let's keep rolling here. Verse 15. So the king started back to Jerusalem. And when he arrived at the Jordan River, the people of Judah came to Gilgal to meet him and escort him across the river. Shimei, son of Gera, the man from Bahurim in Benjamin, hurried across with the men of Judah to welcome King David. 1,000 other men from the tribe of Benjamin were with him, including Ziba, the chief servant of the house of Saul, and Ziba's 15 sons and 20 servants. They rushed down to the Jordan to meet the king. They crossed the shallows of the Jordan to bring the king's household across the river, helping him in every way they could. So, refresher, Ziba's the guy that was a servant in a way of King Saul before David. But after Saul and Jonathan died in battle against the Philistines and David became king, David wants to help out Jonathan's one son, Mephibosheth, who was crippled and couldn't really help himself as well. David helps him out, and as part of that, he asks Ziba to take care of the land that he was essentially giving to Mephibosheth. Then supposedly Mephibosheth joins the rebellion against David when Absalom kind of swoops in and tries to take over. David bumps into Ziba again and is like, alright, well, if Mephibosheth is going to treat me like that, then it's all yours instead of his. Needless to say, the two seem to be on good terms. So, David and his men crossed the Jordan River, headed back to Jerusalem. And they have a crew of people there, including Ziba, trying to help him on his way back. Continuing, I guess, halfway through verse 18. As the king was about to cross the river, Shimei fell down before him. "My lord the king, please forgive me," he pleaded. "Forget the terrible thing that your servant did when you left Jerusalem. May the king put it out of his mind. I know how much I sinned. That is why I have come here today, the very first person in all Israel to greet my lord the king." Then Abishai son of Zeruiah said, "Shimei should die, for he cursed the Lord's anointed king." "Who asked your opinion, you sons of Zeruiah?" David exclaimed. "Why have you become my adversary today? This is not a day for execution, for today I am once again the king of Israel." Then turning to Shimei, David vowed, "Your life will be spared." So, yeah, Shimei, as David and his men were fleeing Jerusalem because of Absalom's rebellion, Shimei, was just throwing curses out at David and his men, literally also throwing dirt and rocks at them, seemingly bitter over David maybe having a hand in some way in Saul's downfall. He was a relative of Saul, I think. So, yeah, he I guess was holding a grudge about that whole situation. But now that they're on the way back, of course, Abishai, so Abishai, Joab in particular, those two, being brothers, both sons of Zeruiah, seemed to clash with David somewhat often as far as how to handle things. Abishai thinks Shimei should die. David's like, "No, this is a happy day. We're not going to kill him." So yeah. Note here, Hebrews says in the house of Joseph rather than in all Israel. Because the house of Joseph specifically would have been the tribes of, I want to say, I don't know. There's two sub tribes that were not fully named after sons of Jacob / Israel. They were named after Joseph's sons. So at the very least, he's saying he's the first among those sub-tribes to greet David, and he's apologizing for what he said before. Note there says prosecutor rather than adversary. Bit of a different meaning, but still, in context, it doesn't change the overall saying as much. I guess it makes it sound more like Abishai is trying to tell David what to do by using the word prosecutor rather than adversary. But, okay, so they're still making their way back to Jerusalem. Let me grab a sip of water here. On to verse 24. Now Mephibosheth, Saul's grandson, came down from Jerusalem to meet the king. He had not cared for his feet, trimmed his beard, or washed his clothes since the day the king left Jerusalem. "Why didn't you come with me, Mephibosheth?" the king asked him. Mephibosheth replied, "My lord the king, my servant Ziba deceived me. I told him, 'Saddle my donkey so I can go with the king.' For as you know, I am crippled. Ziba has slandered me by saying that I refused to come. But I know that my lord the king is like an angel of God, so do what you think is best. All my relatives and I could expect only death from you, my lord, but instead you have honored me by allowing me to eat at your own table. What more can I ask?" "You've said enough," David replied. "I've decided that you and Ziba will divide your land equally between you." "Give him all of it," Mephibosheth said. "I am content just to have you safely back again, my lord the king." So, turns out maybe Ziba was lying to David before. But there's no real proof, at least not yet, of who's really telling the truth here. So David, kind of wanting to believe them equally, it seems, is like, all right, well, you know what? I'll split the land between you two. But Mephibosheth is just like, hey, you know what? I haven't deserved any of the stuff you've given me, even up to this point. Ziba can have the land. I'm just glad that you're all right and everything's, like, kind of okay between us, hopefully. This part is always making me wonder, why is this recorded on the history? Yeah, well, I mean, there could be a couple of reasons it's recorded. One, possibly for record of land dispute and or, you know, like, changing of hands. But also, I mean, it initially brought up Mephibosheth because that was David's way of taking care of Jonathan's descendants after he died. And Mephibosheth was really the only living son of Jonathan. So, you know, it was initially brought up because of that. So now there's continued interaction since Mephibosheth has been mentioned, and it's just a thing that David keeps coming back to and having to deal with. Note there at Mephibosheth is another name for Meribbaal, which I'm sure has a slightly different meaning in Hebrew. Feel free to go look that up. It's still probably referring to the same person. It's just a lot of times when it gives these name differentiations, it's either because ancient Hebrew is vastly different than English, for sure, and or it's because there might be a slight difference in the meaning of the name that sometimes could give extra insight into the person and what they were like, or what God had planned for them, but for the most part, it's not, like, crucial to understanding the story and what's generally going on. So Mephibosheth was talking with Ziba, saying, saddle my donkey. Greek, Syriac, and Latin versions read like that. Hebrew reads, I will saddle a donkey for myself. But how would he do that being crippled? That was the big thing about Mephibosheth, too. He was crippled from a very young age. And it tried back in, I want to say, chapter 4, to explain how he became crippled, just because that was roughly when it would have happened in the sequence of events. Even though it wasn't until chapter 9 that he and David really interacted, and he really became any significant part of the story. But yeah, it's either way, he either was not helped or was somehow stopped. I don't know, but it would make sense that he couldn't really saddle up a donkey and get himself out of there on his own because of being crippled. Maybe Ziba had a hand in that not happening, I don't know. Anyway. And more people David encounters along the way back. Verse 31. Barzillai of Gilead had come down from Rogelim to escort the king across the Jordan. He was very old, 80 years of age, and very wealthy. He was the one who had provided food for the king during his stay in Mahanaim. Come across with me and live in Jerusalem, the king said to Barzillai. I will take care of you there. No, he replied. I am far too old to go with the king to Jerusalem. I am 80 years old today, and I can no longer enjoy anything. Food and wine are no longer tasty, and I cannot hear the singers as they sing. I would only be a burden to my lord the king. Just to go across the Jordan River with the king is all the honor I need. Then let me return again to die in my own town, where my father and mother are buried. But here is your servant, my son Kimham. Let him go with my lord the king, and receive whatever you want to give him." "Good," the king agreed. "Kimham will go with me, and I will help him in any way you would like, and I will do for you anything you want." So all the people crossed the Jordan with the king. After David had blessed Barzillai and kissed him, Barzillai returned to his own home. The king then crossed over to Gilgal, taking Kimham with him. All the troops of Judah and half the troops of Israel escorted the king on his way. Now, I think it mentions the troops of Judah and of Israel separately there, because the troops of Judah were probably the ones that had gone with David as he left. And the rest of Israel, that was the army that Absalom had kind of rounded up to try and fight David. At least I'm thinking that's how it happened. Not 100% sure on that, but that's probably why it distinguishes the two. Because, yes, Judah was part of Israel, but there had been some differences in how things happened over the course of time. Like, Judah accepted David as king before the rest of Israel did, and other things of that sort. So, this guy Barzillai, who had basically helped take care of David while he was in Mahanaim, which was where he kind of made his base, so to speak, when fighting against Absalom's rebellion. David wants to thank Barzillai, but Barzillai is like, "No, I'm too old. It's not going to make much difference to me. Take my son with you and bless him instead of me." And they agree to that. So then they cross the Jordan River after all this, or in amongst all this, I don't know, on the way back to Jerusalem. And then we get to verse 41. "But all the men of Israel complained to the king. 'The men of Judah stole the king and didn't give us the honor of helping take you, your household, and all your men across the Jordan.' The men of Judah replied, 'The king is one of our own kinsmen. Why should this make you angry? We haven't eaten any of the king's food or received any special favors.' 'But there are 10 tribes in Israel,' the others replied. 'So we have 10 times as much right to the king as you do. What right do you have to treat us with such contempt? Weren't we the first to speak of bringing him back to be our king again?' The argument continued back and forth, and the men of Judah spoke even more harshly than the men of Israel." So, I guess the rest of the men of Israel wanted to wait a little longer to, actually get their people down there to help welcome David. But men of Judah perhaps wanted to act quickly as a way of showing that they weren't hesitant to have David as king anymore, like it mentioned they had been early in the chapter. But with their quickness in this whole situation, that makes everybody else not so much able to get there and help to the extent that they wanted, or to welcome David back the way they wanted. So it makes the rest of them look kind of bad, because it seems like they weren't there to help and to support David when they wanted to do so. That kind of seems to be what the argument is all about. The other tribes of Israel are looking at Judah like, "Dude, come on. What are you doing? You're making this look bad." And why? And Judah is pretty much arguing that, well, we're direct family of David. So, like, he's one of us, more so than he is one with the rest of you. So, yeah, they're arguing like this back and forth. And that's actually where the chapter ends. So I guess that'll do it for 2 Samuel 19. Okay, so after a little bit of a push from Joab, it seems like David kind of picks himself up, and also the people of Israel just kind of decide, all right, well, Absalom's dead, so let's just go back to David being king. Why not? But then there's also a little bit of an argument over, like, how they were going to try and welcome David back as king, and whether the men of Judah should have waited for people from the rest of Israel. I will slightly spoil the next chapter. That argument at the end kind of sets up the events of the next chapter. So, if you're looking forward to that, make sure you tune in next time. If you're not subscribed, make sure you do that, so you can come back to it easier whenever that gets posted. Also, make sure you like the video if you enjoyed it, share it with others if you want them to see. Look down in the description for info on social media pages, including supporter page on Ko-fi.com, Discord server where you can chat about stuff in between videos, all sorts of other social media pages where I post just different video links, even short videos there as well, all sorts of different stuff. And down below the description, leave your comments down in that area with any thoughts that you have related to this chapter, like, was Joab right to correct David? Who's right in the argument at the end there, if anybody? It's whatever you got for me, let me know down below. So that's going to do it for now. Hope you're all doing well. Hopefully I'll see you soon for another video. But whatever the case is, till next time, stay cool, people.